There's a new poll out and about the NSA surveillance. I don't know in what order to present the information. Let me just say that I'm going to give you the information that's in the poll. And then I will let you know ahead of time that there are a lot of people emailing me who question the validity of this poll. And we can have that conversation. The poll is from Pew Research Center for the People and the Press. The poll is dated yesterday, June 10th, 2013. And the poll says what? When asking Americans about, now that we know that this is going on in terms of surveillance from the NSA, these tie-ins with private companies like Verizon, how do you feel about it? And the poll says that 56% of Americans, a majority, say that the NSA program, which tracks telephone records of millions of Americans, is an acceptable way for the government to investigate terrorism. And we have a minority, albeit a substantial minority of 41%, that says it is unacceptable. This was conducted between June 6th and 9th among 1,000 adults. It found no indications that the revelations of the government's collection of phone records and internet data have altered the public's view about this trade-off that we often talk about between investigating terrorism and protecting personal privacy. 62% say it's more important for the federal government to investigate possible terrorist threats, even if it does intrude on personal privacy. Now, if you look amongst younger people, Lewis, amongst younger people, it's much closer. It's 51 say, yes, this is okay. 45% say no, that it is intruding on privacy to an extent that is not acceptable. Now, what are the possible problems with the study? Is this a study which we can critique in terms of how it was conducted? If you look at the data, 52% of the respondents say that they were either following the story not at all closely or not too closely. That would say, okay, you've got 60% of Americans who say that this is okay, but half of the respondents don't really know what's going on and may have been kind of push-pulled into answering one way or another by the polling agency. However, the numbers really haven't changed much over time. So even taking that into consideration, these are roughly the same numbers we've had for years. What do you think?
Right. It doesn't surprise me, of course, that so many people don't follow the issue as closely as they should. But then again, how many important small details are there when someone basically tells you that the government can intercept any communication at any time? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I want to ask the question, can we even live in a country like this with a population like this, a society, a government, and the technology like this, and not have this happening? Is that even possible?
That's a question that I guess we don't really have the answer to it. I would say this about the conspiracies that the poll was doctored to create the false perception that there is approval for this type of thing to kind of make it not a scandal, which is if this is a fake poll, if the data has been faked, you would think that that would include more convincing data about how closely people are following the story. Don't you think, Natan? This is always the thing with these conspiracy theories. It's always a poorly done fake study. Why couldn't it just have been faked properly?
I think that it's a pretty poor argument. I think that what's going on is that when people disagree with the poll results, they question its validity, and when they agree with it, they just mention it outright as evidence. I think this is another example. I don't think we need to question this poll any more than we question any other poll.
Here's my question, my main issues around this, right? Around this issue. Number one, is the problem the surveillance, or is the problem not knowing about the surveillance? In other words, how do Americans view not knowing about whether they are being surveilled in this way or not? My assumption would be that you would have some amount of people who would say it is wrong for the government to do this type of surveillance. And then you would have more people who would say, I'm not against the surveillance per se, but I'm against not knowing about this. If we all know that the government has access to this stuff, I am less against it. That doesn't make it any better. It doesn't make it any worse. Doesn't make it any more legal or less legal. But I have a feeling that public opinion would fall along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people do fall into the school of thought that if I'm not doing anything wrong, I don't really care what's going on. And to be honest, in a way, I'm kind of one of those people.
Really?
But
so what? So explain that.
Well, I mean, if this actually does prevent bombings, attacks,
then you would be
murders,
okay with it.
To an extent, yeah. I mean,
Here's the
obviously,
problem.
there's a line. No, I mean, obviously, there's a line that I will draw at one point or another.
Here's the problem I have with that argument. If you look, and we looked at these numbers yesterday, I know you weren't here. We'll hear about your camping trip soon. Yesterday, I looked at the numbers where during the period 1999 to 2010, we had about a little over 3,000 people die in the U.S. because of terrorist attacks.
Right.
And we had, I don't remember exactly the numbers, 150,000 people die from diabetes. And then there was tens of thousands of people dying from gun violence and tens of thousands of people dying from drunk driving, so on and so forth. The question is, given the relative impact of people dying from terrorist activities to all other types of presumably preventable ways of dying, does it make sense to lose this level of privacy? That's really the question. So when people say what you're saying, Lewis, hey, if it's preventing terror, I'm okay with it. We need to also contextualize how many people are dying from terror versus how many people are dying from other things, and how invasive are the remedies to those other problems that are causing death.
I disagree. Well, go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, it may be impossible to know this, but there's also the statistic how many lives were saved by the surveillance.
Much more difficult to know because of classification.
Right.
Natan, you disagree with the framing.
There's problems that I have both with what you were saying and just this general idea about surveillance. Let me just make a general point about surveillance, which is that most people aren't really thinking about this in a way that I would consider to be reasonable, meaning that they're really only thinking about the Fourth Amendment and their idea of what privacy is or should be. And the reality is that we don't really have access to the information that would let us know whether the benefits of the surveillance have led to decreased acts of terrorism. And so we can't really make the right call here. It's a question of whether we have the knowledge to even think about this reasonably. I think most people they have a knee-jerk reaction. They say, the government shouldn't be doing this.
Natan,
the reality is that it's a little bit more complicated.
Do you
than that.
trust that the government, which is the one, that's who makes the call, right? They say, we believe that based on how effective this is at preventing terror, that it is worth it. Do you trust that they'll make the right decision?
It's not a question of trust. You're turning around what I said and making it seem like what I'm saying is that we should be in the dark and let the bureaucrats and politicians decide. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we right now, when you just hear this headline and you see, oh, the government, the NSA has all of our phone records, and you make a judgment on it based on only that, you're not really making a reasonable position. Think about whether, if you were working for the NSA and you're trying to prevent a terrorist attack, and you can, 5 minutes after there is an incident or even 2 days before, you have access to these records and you can more quickly then get a court order and then find the person. Maybe if you were that employee, you would think, this is pretty reasonable. Like, we can actually do a lot of good. So all I'm saying is that a lot of people aren't thinking about this critically. They're thinking about it in this sort of general narrative where the government is Big Brother and it's just all bad.
Not much I can add to that. I mean, there's a lot of truth there. Yeah.